All right, it's time to review UFC 217, and I've got a special guest today. Please welcome Byron Giant to the podcast.
Go away.
No.
Okay.
you are stuck now. You've agreed to this.
That's true. I did, yeah.
Normally I don't usually do card reviews, but UFC 217 was pretty historic. We had 3 new champions crowned, a bunch of really good fights, some good stoppages, just really good stuff. So, what do you think, Byron? Start at the bottom or start at the top?
Well, if we start at the top, then people will tune out after like 5 minutes.
All right, we'll go through the bottom quick, and then we'll get to the top. So, Ricardo Ramos and Ayman Zahadi, the teammate of, or the brother of GSP's coach, went head-to-head, and this was a pretty good fight, and then it became really good with the stoppage, with Ramos landing the spinning back elbow.
Yeah, he went for one, didn't make it, and then immediately went for another one, and then that one was successful. It was like, probably should have seen that coming there, homie. Probably.
It was an interesting fight, and then we had some really interesting stuff with Curtis Blades and Alexei Olenek, with the disqualification turned into a TKO victory for Curtis Blades. Because I assume he was going to get DQ'd, or at least no contested, when he kicked Olenek on the ground in the ear. And we wound up with a video review saying that, realistically speaking, he kicked him in the ear. That really shouldn't have stopped the fight. If Olenek is really out of it, then it was probably the earlier punishment that did it. So that was interesting. And then...
Yep. And the dogs in the backyard are now howling their heads off because barking's not good enough.
Mm-hmm. I don't have anything to say about Randy Brown and Mickey Gall. Do you?
No, not at all. Other than Mickey Gall is apparently the dirtiest player in the game, the new dirty player in the game.
Yeah, they really need to start taking points away instead of just repeatedly warning people. Because he was like grabbing the cage, grabbing the gloves, doing all of the stuff. So not so amazing. And then we had OSP versus Corey Anderson, which was not a particularly great fight up until OSP knocked out Anderson with a head kick. Which,
yeah,
honestly, kind of the OSP trademark at this point.
Has OSP lost like a ton of weight, or is it just me?
Can't say that I agree.
Last time I saw him, he was pretty portly around the middle.
Can't say that I recall him being overly portly now.
He's a fat bastard.
He's gotten a little soft every once in a while, but... And then heavyweight continued to give us some weird stuff, because Mark Godbeer got a DQ due to an illegal head kick, and it's like Walt Harris saw what Ruben Blades did and said, no, I'm going to show you what a foul is.
Yeah.
And he knees Godbeer in the balls, and then kicks him in the head, while the referee's jumping in and go, no, stop!
Yeah, there was, well, in the earlier fight, where the guy got DQ'd, right? Like both guys got DQ'd?
No, Blades got the win via TKO.
Okay, right.
And Harris got DQ'd.
Well, I would have DQ'd really both of them because there was zero reason to throw either of those kicks. I heard some speculation about the first should have been a DQ. Well, we don't know. Like maybe he was aiming for the body. Like he threw an outside kick directly at the man's head. He did not, there was no intention to go across his body to hit the guy in the body.
He was pretty bizarre. I mean, I'll take it because I picked Curtis Blades to win, but yeah, I don't get me wrong. You kicked in the ear, you should be able to continue, but the ear is the equilibrium. The ear is, and if he's already beat up, I mean, it's like, how do you end it on an illegal blow? It's kind of weird, but this one just wound up being a straight up DQ because I don't think Walt Harris had any. Well, honestly, it was a double foul, and I don't think Walt Harris had any real defense for, hey, I need you in the balls, and then kicked you in the head while the ref's telling me to stop.
Yeah.
It was a weird fight, though, because Harris went... so on Twitter, it started going like, this is ADCC Harris. The same way we talk about like K1 Matt Hughes back in the day. Because he started this weird ground game thing when he's really a kickboxer. So that's just weird. James Vick, Joe Duffy. I actually have some technical breakdown for this one. I picked Joe Duffy to win the fight, And I think the reasons I picked him were kind of obvious. Like, he is, I think, the technically better striker of the two. It's just that James Vick, really long, actually pretty quick for, like, a long guy. Because, the gangly fighters tend to be a little bit slow on bringing, like, arms back for defense and stuff. Vick has a snap to him that most people don't have. And, really tough guy. So, like, a lot of physical elements got him through this fight where he was technically not really up to it. In my opinion.
I would believe you are to be correct.
And then we had Paulo Costa, Johnny Hendricks. You just watched this one.
Yeah, it was kind of weird because it was obvious at the end there that the fight was never going to go any other way. Like Costa was going to just keep beating the shit out of Hendricks until such time as somebody fell over dead or Costa fell over from exhaustion. But Hendricks was still, pretty much with it, and even had a single leg takedown at the end when the ref kind of got in there and stopped the whole shenanigans. So, you stopped the fight while the guy was getting a takedown. However, when the fight was stopped, Johnny Hendricks did not protest even a little bit. So it's not... if the guy in the middle of the fight doesn't want to continue and doesn't protest, then, who am I to say one way or the other?
Yeah, I kind of agreed. I thought originally, I'm like, that's a bit of an early stoppage, but this is only going one way. Yeah. I'm kind of at the point where I don't want to see Johnny Hendricks fight anymore.
Yeah, well, I didn't really enjoy seeing him fight in the first place.
Yeah, but at this point, I'm starting to feel just bad about it, because he clearly just doesn't have anything anymore. Like, yeah. Just really... Like, I thought maybe the move up to 185 would help him a little bit, cut less weight, kind of relax, but... He seemed to just get fatter when he moved up to 185. Like, he missed weight for the Tim Boetsch fight at 185.
Looks.
And, he made weight this time, but he just looks... He looks uninspired, looks out of it. As you said, didn't really protest what could have been an early stoppage. So, I don't... Please, UFC, don't book him anymore. If he feels like he has to fight or whatever, he can go do so on smaller promotions, because... This is getting to the level of, we've seen a number of fighters reach this level where it's like they don't stop, but they should stop. Like, for example, Little Nog's got a fight coming up, but I'm just like, I don't want to watch that.
No.
I have no interest whatsoever in seeing some of these guys fight.
No, the Nogueira brothers have their place in history, and they should please accept that.
Yeah.
Please.
Then we had Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and George Masvidal, and I really like this fight. I was looking forward to it. It was a really interesting technical battle. Wonderboy getting to kind of rebound after the whole Tyron Woodley fiasco of two really terrible fights.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first one was okay, but the second one was god-awful. He just showed kind of, like, honestly the problem that George Masvidal has always had. He doesn't really adjust during fights. He's, kind of coasts. He, is quite good at everything and physically gifted, but he never really puts it together. He's got that win over Donald Cerrone, which is a big deal. But if you look at his career otherwise, there's not a lot of very notable names that George Masvidal has honestly beaten, like truly elite fighters. It's Cerrone, and then it's just pulling up his record right now. I guess you could put Mike Chiesa on the list, maybe, but that's kind of like okay, he beat Yves Edwards back in like 2007 when Edwards was still, kind of something. But aside from that, it's a lot of like guys with Wikipedia pages, but they're kind of like they're just there, and also the fact that he struggled with Darren Cruikshank back in the day kind of suggested where this fight was going, and it went pretty well according to plan. And then we get to the title fights, and Rose Namajunas versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Now, how familiar are you with Joanna Jędrzejczyk? Because I know you've fallen somewhat out of love with MMA.
Yeah, well, my problem, to put it all in a nutshell, is at the time, they were only doing the same fights over and over. It was during the whole, we only get BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar fights for like 2 years straight, and they would always do the same fight over and over and over and over and over, and then when they had somebody new come in, it was always a setup fight. It was always like a pro wrestling style squash match. It's like, I know who's going to win this fight. Well, why would I bother watching it? And 90% of the time, I was right. So, yeah, Ioana and Jacek, I believe, I actually might have seen all of her UFC fights. Let me do a little investigating here.
She has fought for the UFC something like 10 times maybe at this point.
No, maybe I haven't.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so that's one off.
Okay, yeah, so I haven't seen all those. I've seen the Kalkevich fight, the Andrade fight, or is it Androgynous? Something like that?
It's Andrade, yeah.
Gedalia. I don't think I saw the Letourneau fight or anything previous to that, but I've definitely seen basically the whole post Ultimate Fighter. I've seen those.
Yeah. So, she's a pretty big deal in losing in the first round to Rose Namajunas. That's a big, big deal. So, congratulations to Thug Rose. I did think that she would have problems early because Ioana is a slow starter. And Thug Rose is not. She gets on the gas and goes out there. And I thought the fight would go later on, and then Rose would kind of start to break a little bit mentally because she does tend to be a little bit over emotional. But yeah, she went out there and said, for all the people not counting me as a title threat, here I am, and here is your champion. Throw head into crowd. So that was pretty freaking amazing. It was the first of 3 new champions crowned on the night, and then we'll probably have more to say on this. TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt. A lot of people have sides in the whole TJ Dillashaw versus Alpha Male feud. I think you and I are in agreement on this.
They're
don't.
both douchebags.
Yeah, we don't like anyone who's basically ever been associated with Alpha Male.
No, I can't think. Occasionally Faber's kind of reasonable and easygoing and a nice guy, but for the most part, he's just a douchebag.
But it seems also like Faber runs like a cult more so than an MMA gym over there. Anytime they bring a head coach in and then the head coach starts to disagree with Faber, inevitably things break down. And we saw this with Dwayne Ludwig and with Martin Kampmann, who are 2 men that you and I think have immense respect for in the MMA field.
Absolutely.
And also, when those 2 guys were there was when Alpha Male was probably at its best in terms of a camp. And you see this when Ludwig leaves and Joe Benavidez is leaving and TJ Dillashaw is leaving and all that. And it's like Faber is, I think, honestly, a little bit counterproductive. And I've said this repetitively. Every Alpha Male fighter fights the same fight over and over again. And that works because they're almost to a man fantastic athletes. And when they aren't, you see what happens. Like Danny Castillo is an example of a guy who is probably he's above average, but not elite athlete that's out of that gym. And he really struggles. His run at lightweight was not particularly amazing. And you end up with the same problem here. And I think Garbrandt didn't really take into account how much TJ can throw those kicks. And I will say if he makes some adjustments, I probably would be tempted to take him in a rematch because I thought he won the first round and that he did show the better boxing, the better kind of put together game. Whereas Dillashaw, his footwork is only really comfortable going forward and when he can unveil kicks or takedowns. And if you have a better boxing game than him and you're not really easy to take down and you're fast, I feel very uncomfortable picking Dillashaw in that kind of fight. And Garbrandt is probably the only guy that kind of represents that. Maybe, and Dominic Cruz. But that division is now pretty fantastic. Although, it's going to lead to a lot of rematches, which you don't really care for.
Yeah, no. I mean, if it's a genuinely interesting fight, i.e., if they do a rematch for the main event, I'm interested. But if they want to do a rematch of... trying to think. If they were going to do a rematch between Duffy and the Texecutioner, I don't care.
No. That's not a fight that needs a run back on it.
No, but I mean, they would do that anyway. It's if it was more exciting, then they'd just do it anyway regardless. It doesn't matter.
They've gotten away from that at least, which is nice.
Yeah, when things seem to have changed somewhat since they sold the company, but they're still doing things like the Wonder Boy versus Woodley 2, and they'll probably do a third or a 15th one if they can. Because theoretically, there's a great fight to be had there.
The second fight between Woodley and Thompson, I think, have ended any thoughts of having a trilogy between those two.
Well, like theoretically on paper, there's a great fight in there somewhere, but fuck's sake, neither of them can have that fight. It seems.
I don't know how many great fights I really think Woodley can have. Not to get into him too much because he wasn't on this card, but I find Tyron Woodley's style of fighting to be completely unconducive to actually having a great fight. An exciting finish, yes, because he can unleash a lot of violence in like a couple of seconds. But he's at the end of the day, he's a low output striker who happens to have a lot of power and is a very good wrestler, and that's the only reason it works for him.
Correct.
And then main event time, GSP versus Michael Bisping. Canada has a UFC champion once again as GSP chokes out Bisping. Choked him unconscious. Yes.
Dude, there's a word on that. GSP knew that was done and deliberately threw one of his hooks off. Like, he had it in for maybe 2-3 seconds, went, this is mine now. And he didn't, just released. No problem. I do commend fighters who don't tap to chokes because it's not a medically harming thing. I
do wonder if you get choked out 8 times or something, if maybe at some point there starts to be some brain problems.
It's like a certain amount of chokes equals a concussion or concussion-like symptoms.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, people go diving all the time, like free diving, and they hold their breath for an extended amount of time. Now, they're not losing consciousness because they'll die, but holding your breath for a short amount of time, I don't think does any damage. And having the blood supply cut off to the brain because of rear naked choke isn't really a choke. It's a blood choke. That will... I don't know. Is it really depriving the brain of much for very long, because you release the hold right away in a competitive environment, and one would think you're doing it even quicker in practice because people will choke. You've got this on, I'll tap, and you just let me go.
I kind of just remember there was a day in jiu-jitsu class where I was rolling with the same guy, and he had this guillotine move. It was really sweet, actually. I kept telling him he should try MMA or something, because his ability to grapple wasn't necessarily great, because his positioning was kind of bad and whatever. But in MMA, I'm like, dude, you could probably actually win some fights doing this, because it's a pretty sweet move. And he caught me a number of times. I do remember, for the next couple of days going, oh, God, I feel lightheaded, and this is kind of like having a concussion. So I don't know. It's something I'd be interested to hear a doctor's opinion on the matter.
Yeah, that's true. But I had another point about the choke, but I can't remember what it was. Anyway, I think just the basic technique, the whole technique. Even Joe Rogan was saying this is, and somebody had mentioned that this is the stuff. If somebody lets you do it first day in practice, this is what it's supposed to look like, and this is top of the food chain, champion versus champion type scenario, and he just did it.
Mind you, in fairness, Bisping is the weirdest champion the UFC's ever had.
He might be the weirdest fighter the UFC's ever had, but he's also the winningest fighter the UFC's ever had. So, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, the only problem I had with this fight, kind of in the build-up more than the fight itself. The fight itself I enjoyed the entire time, but in the build-up there was a lot of talk of just kind of trying to big up Bisping in ways that weren't actually true. In a nutshell. They're talking about how, GSP, Michael Bisping's got real knockout power these days, and they're trying to point out they keep going back to the Rockhold knock. I'm like, it's since he started training with Jason Perillo, he's starting to actually find knockout power. He has 1 knockout in that time. Yeah. One.
Yeah.
In 5. He still wins by decision, people.
Yeah, but he does not necessarily have knockout power, but he's got knockdown power now, which is usually something people have near the beginning of the career. But
this is not
old man strength.
This isn't like me trying to say Michael Bisping doesn't hit hard or whatever, because there's definitely been a transformation, but they just they really harped on that in a way of, like, he can end this fight in one punch. I'm like, he can't. Let's be real here. And the other thing I had was, has anyone seen Tim Kennedy versus Michael Bisping? Because throughout the build-up to this fight, including my brother, and yes, my brother's an idiot, before you bring that up.
Correct.
He's like, I hear from like 9 or 10 different people, including Joe Rogan, oh, Michael Bisping's really difficult to hold down. Really? What, like, great top control grappler has Michael Bisping got up from under? Because I can't think of one. For the life of me.
I can't think of any grappler off the top of my head, but he definitely, like all the best wrestlers, he can get taken down, but he gets up. Like,
I can't even think of that though. Like, because if you look at Bisping's record, the man has fought a surprisingly limited number of wrestlers in his UFC run. You've got,
well, let's see, Dan Henderson, GSP, Luke Rockhold. Those are all wrestlers. CB Dollaway.
Rockhold didn't try to take him down, and Henderson's an old man.
Tim Kennedy. Tim Kennedy wasn't a wrestler.
And Kennedy took him down and held him down.
Ellen Belcher. Akiyama. Or, no, Akiyama wasn't a wrestler, was he?
He was a judo guy.
Judo,
but,
yeah. Same
top conditioned guy, but he also mostly stood with them.
Mm-hmm. Dan Miller. Chris Lieben, Charles McCarthy, Matt Hamill, Eric Schaefer, Josh Bring the Pain Haynes.
I don't know what to consider Josh Haynes, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never really figured out what he's really supposed to be good at.
There are, I would just like to say that there are a number of very good grapplers and very good wrestlers on his career list, and I don't remember anybody, like, I obviously haven't seen all of his fights. I've seen a lot of them, but I haven't seen all of them, and I don't remember anybody ever holding him down and beating the shit out of him.
I can remember Tim Kennedy doing it. I can remember Rashad Evans doing it.
Did he fight Rashad Evans?
He did, way early in his career.
Yeah, I thought he fought him more recently than that. Who fought Rashad Evans recently that I thought should have beaten him?
Almost everyone that's fought Rashad Evans lately has beaten him.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at that now. I'm just kind of having a look at who was it. I thought there was somebody. Never mind. I guess not, because Chael Sonnen.
Rashad Evans is 2-6 in his last 8.
Yeah.
Maybe Dan Henderson.
Maybe, probably.
But, like, I look at this, I'm like, the only, like, elite top position grapplers he's kind of fought are Chael Sonnen, if you don't count submission defense.
Yeah.
Tim Kennedy, Akiyama, but Akiyama stood with him, and Dan Miller. No one else really stands out as, like, you gotta remember Matt Hamill when he fought him, super young in his career, and honestly, Hamill's career didn't really turn into what we thought it was going to, if we're being honest.
Well, I mean, he did have that issue with listening to instructions from the corner.
Well, he's deaf.
I know, that's the joke.
And the other thing, the other thing is the big upmanship kind of continued at the end when they're like, GSP looks better than ever. I'm like, he didn't.
He looks bigger than ever.
Let's be honest here. GSP looked tired in round number 2. That's something
but he came
we've
out in
never
round
seen.
number 3, like, refreshed. He definitely had a second win there between rounds.
Oh, he did. But what I'm saying is GSP is a guy who fought 5 rounds before without needing that second win.
Yeah.
So to say he's better than ever is a bit silly.
Well, I mean, he's more adaptable than ever. But he, like, his back and shoulders look freaking giant.
Yeah. Well, he looked like he might actually be the bigger man against Bisping, despite the fact that Bisping's the 205er who came down to 185, and GSP's a 170er up to 185.
Yeah, he also had I'm used to seeing full-on abs on GSP, and he did not have that. So I think he just pulled a James Franco and packed on as much weight as possible to make the weight limit, and then maybe had to cut down a little bit, but, you know, he may have overdone it, And
I think he needed to cut.
GSP,
I think he needed to cut a reasonable amount because if I recall, back in the day, we're talking 4 years ago, GSP used to cut down from about 185, 190 to make 170. So he wouldn't have had to put weight on simply to be 185 pounds.
Yeah.
So anything he put on, he cut.
He was definitely packing more weight than any time in his career, and I think he was just not used to it. If he, depending on how long he's going to be back for, I anticipate him looking better and better with the cardio every single time out.
Mm-hmm. Oh, same thing. Like I think the cardio problem is largely the weight shift, being a little bit heavier coming into the fight, and that's probably a big part of it. But I mean, just Rogan sometimes is just a shill, which, in fairness, it's his job. I just hope no one really buys it.
He's also pretty good friends with some fighters. I don't think he's good friends with either Bisping or GSP, but I mean they're around each other not infrequently, so you get familiar. And then Joe Rogan's even said many times on his own podcast, like, I sometimes have a hard time being unbiased because I'm obviously friends with some of these guys.
Yep. It's just my usual statement to people not to necessarily believe what the UFC tells you, because if you do, you believe Dana White. And my general philosophy on Dana White is he is always lying to me, and when it winds up being true, it's because something random happened and it ended up being true. So yeah, fantastic card, 3 new champions, amazing stuff. If you've not seen it, go watch it, because I would say almost every fight here is worth at least watching the end of. Like, I'll admit OSP versus Corey Anderson's, for example, not a good fight. Just, watch the final round. And, neither of the heavyweight fights are necessarily great fights, but they have some bizarre illegal fouling going on in there, which is interesting. We didn't really see much about Randy Brown and Mickey Gall, but it was kind of an interesting fight.
It's definitely a good way to get a fight going, and if you're not quite in the right position, just haul on the fence and get yourself right into guillotine range.
Yep. Some interesting stats there. I like it that the UFC refereeing, we have the instant replay to try to avoid some stuff, but I think it solves very few of the problems that we currently have, because a lot of the problems we have is just referees not enforcing rules, and I would really like to see that improved, because the Gall-Brown fight was a perfect example of just stop grabbing the cage. I'm like, how many times does he have to grab it before you take a point? And
17.
We've had this problem for a long time with eye pokes. Like, if your name is Josh Koscheck, you can blind someone in the fight and not get a point taken away.
Or if your name's GSP, you can blind somebody over the course of a fight using only one punch.
Well, yeah, but that's legal technically.
Yeah.
I'm just remembering like Koscheck versus Mike Pierce, where I'm like, I don't think Mike Pierce can see anymore. Like that's where this fight has gotten to. It's not because his eyes are swollen shut. It's because he keeps eating Koscheck's thumb to the eyeball. So that was it. So that was a really fun night of fights. Go check it out if you haven't. It gets me hyped for future UFC events. Does it get you hyped, sir?
It was reasonably hype-worthy, yeah.
Are you going to watch Dustin Poirier versus Showtime Pettis?
I don't know. Is Showtime falling off the wagon to greatness there, or like what's his deal?
He journeyed down to 145, and that did not go well. But he looked good when he returned to 155.
Well, then maybe we'll have to examine things.
And also on that card is the immortal Matt Brown's retirement fight against Diego, the Nightmare Sanchez.
I don't want him to retire.
And please, God, let that be Diego's retirement fight, too.
Matt Brown, put him in a hole.
Actually, I'm looking at this card, and I'm like, please let almost all of these be retirement fights, because, like, allow me to read off a list of names that are on this card. Matt Brown, Diego Sanchez, Andrei Arlovsky, Nate Marquardt, Clay Guida, Joe Lozon.
Oh, man, what is this, the nostalgia wagon?
Court McGee's on the card.
Oh, my God.
So yeah, I kind of feel like this could be like a send-off card would be nice. Like have Sanchez and Brown's a retirement fight, Lozon versus Guida's a retirement fight, Nate Marquardt should already be freaking retired. And Arlovsky, I don't really want to see fight anymore. Andrei Arlovsky, like, he had a point in his career where I thought I wanted to see him retire. And that was probably after the Sergei Haratonov loss back in 2011. Mm-hmm. Then he kind of turned it around, but now we're back to that point because he got destroyed at points in his fight with Marcin Tybura, and it's not a good look. Not a good look. And he's been stopped in 4 of his last 5 fights. Once by submission, in fairness. Josh Barnett rear naked choked him. But it's getting sad to see some of these... Kind of going into the Johnny Hendricks file, it's getting sad to see some of these guys fight. And I would love it if they would just go out, win a fight and go out on top. That'd be nice.
Yep.
So that's all for UFC 217. We're going to do a wrestling podcast now. And we'll talk to you later. Well, I will. I don't know about Byron. We may bring Byron back.
Maybe.
If there's a lot of comments on this video, we'll bring Byron back. How's that sound?
Get that idiot off the air.